Hello, everybody, and welcome to this panel on standardization in esports and the way forward. My name is Kyle. I'll be moderating this fantastic discussion with two of my good friends, Michał Blicharz, and I think he told me how to pronounce his name properly to make fun of me. He's the VP of Product Development at ESL and the architect of the ESL Pro Tour, ESL Pro League, amongst others. And then Ben Noxville Steenhuisen, the senior software architect at Bayes Esports and a Dota 2 and Counter-Strike statistician. We got a lot to talk about, so we're just going to jump right into it, guys. Esports standardization, what is it? What does it mean to you? And we'll start with Carmac.
Well, what is love, right? It's a very open question. Esports in general runs within a single game. Certain games have standards like League of Legends, Overwatch. Certain games don't, like Counter-Strike, where the publisher just lets the industry run everything. And in those two different paradigms, standardization means something else. Specifically in Counter-Strike, standardization means there's multiple 5 or 6 tournament operators in the space that run tournaments, and they have slightly differing rule sets, slightly differing approaches to things, slightly different sets of punishments for the same infraction, and with time it's been getting aligned. So that would be standardization in Counter-Strike.
Ben?
Yeah, I think Carmac's done a very good job opening up, but I think it can go further. So standardization is not just like the homogenization of different rules and ideas. It's also sometimes just saying like an agreement on what is bad and what we should avoid or how we should avoid doing something. So it's not necessarily saying like this is the only way to do it. It's rather defining like kind of a broad definition of what things which are good and things which are not good, and like classifying them either as okay or not okay. So like an example of this is like some standardization might exist that you don't want a tournament where teams play right after losing, they play another match, like an elimination match. So this is just like an example of something in terms of standardization where every single tournament and every single title could have a rule or a concept that is similar to this in some way or some form.
All right, cool. Thanks. Well, we'll start from like a top-down view. So a lot of newer viewers might not recognize how different esport is from traditional sport. So if you look at traditional sport, effectively every model is some sort of bought-in franchise league with a feeder program and a lot of stability within, whether you're looking at the NFL or the Premier League. That doesn't really exist in esport, with the exception of leagues that are backed by the publishers themselves. Carmac, could you go into a little detail on the role of a publisher in the standardized esport competitive scene of their specific game?
Well, if you ask me about the role of the publisher, I would always say the role of the publisher is to ensure longevity for the esport. What does that mean? That means that the superstar that's today, 5 years down the line, is replaced by a new superstar. And 5 years after, that superstar is replaced by somebody else. And they get consistently better rather than kind of progressively worse, as we've seen with some video games. Let's say Warcraft 3 along the years, the new champions were basically the new number ones in the world, were basically those that remained after the previous number one quit. And this is not something that you're looking for. That is basically ensuring longevity for the delivery of esports champions is the number one goal for any publisher. Everything else, you can slice it any way you want. You can run your own league. You can copy it off of an NFL model, which is, by the way, 100 years old and built around monetizing stadiums and has nothing to do with how modern sports are structured.
We're going to get to stadiums later. We can go on about that.
You can do any measure of let the community or the industry drive it, like in Counter-Strike, or you can do any measure of I'll take it all and standardize everything and do it myself. And both have different benefits to them. You can you can have the autocracy and manage everything yourself, and then every mistake you make is blown out of proportion because it's very strong. Every mistake you make as a publisher, if you're the autocrat, but also you can do everything you want, exactly everything you want, because you own the game. You can dictate everything. If you leave it up to the ecosystem, like Valve does in Counter-Strike pretty much, then you can get away with having 60% of the Twitch esports hours that League of Legends has with Counter-Strike at an annual investment of just several $1,000,000 compared to hundreds from Riot Games. But you also end up with a little bit of chaos on the other end, because it's not just ESL running Counter-Strike events. It's Blast, it's StarLadder, it's several others. So everything has a cost and nothing is perfect.
Gotcha. And to go off that point, Ben, because I know you're obviously much like me more familiar with Dota. Dota is a game also owned and operated by Valve, but they take a very hands-on approach in comparison to what they do with Counter-Strike. Which model do you prefer, and what are your thoughts on their actions within Dota?
Well, I kind of disagree in some ways, in that I don't think that, in general, esports publishers or game publishers care necessarily about the longevity of a title. They just care about the long-term profits that this title would give to them. So in some cases, that means...
Never said they care. I said it's their job.
Okay, well... I would argue that their job is just to maximize profits, and if it reaches a time in the life cycle of a game where the viewership starts going down, and what it would take would be cash investment, whether that's through marketing, whether that's through hosting additional tournaments and pumping your own money in, I think that for some publishers, that's just, they wouldn't care about the longevity. I don't think that they would, their business goals would necessarily align with it. And in some esports titles...
I'm sorry, they absolutely do. If you see esports as a benefit, then you want to ensure that esports has longevity. Otherwise, if you don't see esports as a benefit, okay, do whatever you want, right?
I think at different stages in the life cycle of esport, you care more about prioritizing different things in order to accomplish those goals. So, for example, like Dota, when Dota started, the International was entirely there as a marketing tool. It was there as a way to just... Valve was like saying, oh, we could spend $1 million or $1.6 million on some TV adverts, or we could use this money to host a tournament and get some huge hype around it. And that carried on, and then eventually crowdfunding came in. It was able to monetize the crowd, the average fan wanting to, first of all, participate in the competitive side, being able to contribute money to their favorite teams, but they were also able to get something as a reward. So it seemed like everyone wins. But if for example, the crowdfunding in the International starts going down, do you really expect that Valve is just going to foot the bill for hosting the International by themselves? I don't know if it's such an easy call to make. I mean, I could imagine they would. I could imagine they wouldn't. But I think it's definitely an undecided scenario for them.
Interesting. Well, let's get into, I suppose, then more about publisher-backed and owned and operated esports scenes. The most famous of which are probably the approach Riot takes with League of Legends and what Blizzard does with the Overwatch League and their new Call of Duty World League in comparison to, I really don't think there's another third-party league or tour, with the exception of ESL Pro Tour, ESL Pro League in StarCraft and Counter-Strike. So, Carmac, I think that launched like 2 or 3 years ago. Do you want to just go into some of the difficulties you faced and what you think prevents other independent entities like collections of teams and TOs from doing the same in other games?
Well, overall, there is a difficulty in running a ESL Pro Tour, in that you don't own the calendar. You're not God in that ecosystem. You're just part of the ecosystem. So what we had was a critical mass of a large number of events which were established along the years. You know, your Intel Extreme Masters Katowice, your ESL One, and now Intel Extreme Masters Colognes, your ESL Pro Leagues. And we had a bunch of disconnected entities that made sense to connect into an ESL Pro Tour where where there is one story, where there's a point system that ladders up into some kind of big conclusion at $1 million event with a final, where there is the Intel Grand Slam, which is a $1 million prize that connects these events further as well. So the difficulty is actually being able to cook a meal with what happens to be in the fridge, as opposed to just click and order exactly what you want, right? And that meal needs to also be delicious. I happen to think that we've managed to do it quite successfully, although COVID has made it a little bit difficult to kind of gel it into one piece. So yeah, the difficulties are that you don't own the calendar, that there are things that happen in between your event A and your event B. There could be 2 or 3 events where the same team that won your event A is playing, and then that team competes at your event B later on. So you need to figure out how your products combine into a narrative that makes sense for fans, that is easy to tell and easy to understand. That's probably the single one biggest challenge there, compared to an ecosystem where, hey, there's just one product in the ecosystem, you follow this, and it's super, super easy, right? So that one of the downsides of Counter-Strike, where the publisher is, let's call it, uninvolved, which is, by the way, its greatest asset at the same time, is the fact that you have that little bit of chaos in the narrative.
Yeah, I just want to elaborate just for a second there on where Carmac was saying that the publisher is God. So, like, for comparison, one could argue that in some sense in football, FIFA is God, or in rugby, the World Rugby Group is God. However, those bodies themselves are essentially managed by, in those cases, the countries that form part of their federation. So, for example, in rugby, all the home nations, all of the England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and Australia, New Zealand, all like the tier 1 nations have voting rights, that they're able to make amendments to the rules and change. Whereas in Valve, if they get a critical mass within a team and says, yeah, we're going to change the money to start with $12,000, we can do that. I mean, they can just go there and they can go filter, add it in the server config, and that's like the default. And then the responsibility becomes on the tournament organizer side to say, do we follow that, or do we stick with what we have? And this kind of disconnect is what leads to some of the chaos that happens. Like when a big patch comes in just before a tournament, and the tournament has to decide, like make a very rash call or very abrupt call on whether or not they're going to stick with the old patch or go with the new one, what the timing is, how it's going to impact. So there's a lot of more responsibility on the side of third-party tournament organizers to keep things stable and keep things afloat.
Yeah, and I want to also touch on like digital goods sales and the lack of access outside of the publisher to revenue derived from those sources. And Counter-Strike is an example, gun skins. Previously, years ago, individual players and teams within Dota were able to create their own treasures that were then purchasable in game, and a portion of the revenue would go to the artist and it would go to the team or the player. Comparatively, when you look at leagues like, say, Overwatch, like this same exists. You're buying Tracer skins, but obviously this revenue, I believe, would then be shared amongst like partner teams. Main point, in your case, specifically Carmac, you don't have access to the in-game revenue. Do you think that that's an issue long term? Do you think, to your point, Ben, that there's a sense of responsibility for the publisher? Because unlike FIFA, Valve, Blizzard, like they own their games. And, the famous example of Heroes of the Storm was a esports circuit designed by Blizzard for their game. And then they just stopped it.
I just want to say 2 things. First of all, in CSGO, there were stickers for the majors, which were a huge revenue driver for the teams. Like, there was a lot of discussion about sticker money and how the splits went on that, and how some teams made huge money off that. And in Dota, at one point around, I would say 2013 or so, 2014, Valve did allow third-party tournament organizers to make their own compendium in the game, like their own interactive compendium that you could like buy levels or buy a compendium, which was different to just buying a ticket for the event, which was a even prior concept that they had in Dota 2. But yeah, you could do things like you could vote, you could make predictions, you could do stuff like that. But it was so complicated and poorly set up. I think the only people in the world who knew how to set it up was three or four people who were modders in the Dota 2 community, and only one or two tournaments ever had it. It was like the Summit and one of the Asian DAC that had it. So only two tournaments ever utilized this functionality, and then it was thrown away. So it was like an experiment that like very few people benefited from, and would be great if it were supported more effectively as a revenue driver directly to the teams, or partially to the teams at least.
I mean, when we look at things like the international or the CSGO majors or anything that the publishers do, the big advantage for esports that the publisher has is the ability to access 100% of the fan base directly and monetize that fan base directly. And it's different if a publisher is selling goods around esports compared to, let's say, an independent tournament organizer, ESL or otherwise, because publishers are obviously much more trusted inherently because they've made the game that these people love, whereas a third party isn't necessarily endorsed by the publisher in any way. And I feel like there is a slight disadvantage, let's say, in TO operated ecosystems, that this audience monetization is, let's say, not utilized to its full potential because it's a great revenue source for the esports ecosystems, and the fan base is highly interested in supporting. So that is a challenge that hopefully will be resolved in the near future.
Gotcha. I found the stats. So to Ben's example, was actually the Summit 2 sold in-game chests that I believe 25% of the in-game cost was then put into the prize pool, and it grew from $100,000 to $310,912 total. So basically tripled the prize pool. And when they then tried to do this after that functionality was removed, where purchases of like real life items, t-shirts and merchandise, like actual things you can hold, they were only able to increase the price pool to $101,044. So $1,000 basically. Main point, the new generation much prefers digital goods to actual physical ones, t-shirts, etc., which funny enough will lead us into our next point. I wanted to talk to you guys about what Blizzard's gamble, specifically on localizing fan bases and trying to take what's a very like global viewership and push them into regional fan base setups. In addition, a major cost, specifically talking about Overwatch League and the Call of Duty World League, where you're now post-COVID, of course, going to have live events, your team in your region playing. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Is this a pipe dream? Is this something that you see as a potential in terms of actually getting physical location-based fan bases for esport?
Do you want to start off, Ben?
Sure. I mean, to me, surprise. Yeah, to me, I don't generally like the concept because in my head, there's like a very good reason why sports has developed in the way that sports has, and why esports has developed in the way esports has. So what I mean by that is, when traditional sports, when you start playing, let's say, football at your school, and then if you're good at your school, you start playing for whatever, your city, or eventually your state, your country. It's a very natural pyramid where as you go up, you're going up in skill, and the number of players that are at that skill decreases. The same is true in esports, just in terms of how competitive games work in general. You have ladder systems, or you have MMR, or you have your skill rating, or in League of Legends, your ELO rating and your placement here. And for me, like the whole concept, like the greatest thing is just you have some of these teams that have formed in the history of esports that have like no geographic, sometimes like a language barrier. They've got no geographic understanding or pattern to them. They're people from all over, and it would make, when you start talking about these regionalized, like Shanghai versus London, whatever, you start having to find an organization that's willing to headquarter in these slightly harder to convert locations, and you're having to try bring these people from all over. You're just like creating a way more complicated problem, and at bringing together the people to participate and represent these organizations. Whereas if you have just a name, it's not necessarily tied to a specific town or region. It doesn't exclude any potential fans who are like, oh, I really hate that country, or every time I go there, I don't enjoy the tourists from this country. It just adds this like unnecessary layer, which I think in general no other esport really has attempted to follow, at least since like CGS or something like that, distant past. So in general, I'm not a fan of the concept, but I think maybe the execution could be a lot better, and that could convince me that it's a good idea.
I think overall, like trying to do this is, it really seems to me like somebody with a big track record of great business success, with a substantial ego, came in and said, you idiots don't know what you're doing, and you haven't known what you've been doing. Here's an idea that's 100 years old. Let's copy that. Let's install it in a brand new digital sport, right? Why do that when the whole reason why sports get played in the systems that we know today, it's built around how you were able to monetize sports at the time. At the time when the NFL started, or the Football League in England, you're practically the only source of revenue, because it was before radio, before television, before cheap flights, smartphones, digital TV, broadcast rights, anything. It was just a ticket to the match, a hot dog, and a beer. So how do we monetize? How do we maximize monetization? Oh, let's play the largest number of regular season games that we can to maximize monetization. Now, is that even interesting to watch a middle of October regular season of the NBA? Teams play what, 72 games each?
82.
82 games each. Okay, well, how compelling is game number 49 in the middle of October, midway through, the regular season? Is that the most compelling thing? Well, let's think about it. In esports, most of the business value generated is a derivative of the broadcasting, of how popular the broadcast is. So clearly, you want to be designing not towards maximizing ticket sales revenue, which is measly in esports and has been, but you should be maximizing how interest this is to people that might want to wake up for it in Asia, in South America, in Europe, in North America, all at the same time, because it's that compelling, which is something the NBA is failing terribly at. And as I understand it, they're trying to also change it. So why would you copy systems which were designed around logistical and monetization, let's say, circumstances and challenges from 100 years ago, where those don't exist anymore? If you look at sports, the youngest of the big franchise structures is the NBA. It's something 1946 or something, founded, with the predecessors obviously operating before that. Everything that's modern and new, like the ATP 1974, is a circuit of tournaments. The UFC is built to monetize global viewership. Everything these days that's relatively new is built to monetize global viewership. The Chicago Bulls haven't become a global brand because of the city of Chicago. They could have been Houston Rockets becoming an iconic brand if Michael Jordan played for them. So all the teams, if I run a gaming team, I want a gaming team that is global, international, and I have a global fan base, because that allows me to monetize millions of people, as opposed to just my city, with headquarters in Los Angeles, New York City, Shanghai, Tokyo, Berlin, and London, and have teams that actually tour around the place and interact with fans over there. So by that rant, you can probably tell not a big fan of copying traditional sports brainlessly.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to break down from.
There is something.
One sec.
I just want to say. Okay, I was just going to say there is some value in having a sort of home base, like dedicated fans from a city or from a country. Like Navi has got like the whole of Ukraine and always has had the whole of Ukraine behind them. You have Big, which is a Counter-Strike team that's a lot of Berlin, so gets a lot of Berlin support, but it's not necessary, and it's not like it's not their way of saying we want to see city versus city, country versus country. It's just their way of getting more fans and more viewership behind their
They
brand.
establish an identity, right? That's vivid.
Yeah.
It's a vivid identity for them. It's not it helps build their brand better, rather than LA, who cares? Two teams from LA, who cares?
Which, of course, the NBA and the NFL, of course, also have two teams in Los Angeles, biggest market after all. I wanted to touch on the point you made about the Navi specifically, because that I think is a more unique case. Whereas if you look at, say, FaZe in Counter-Strike or Team Secret in Dota 2, it's quite common in esport for teams to be comprised of 5 different nationalities, 6 often if you include the coach. And one, before we move on, we're talking about standardization within esports. Blizzard, you may disagree with the model, but the ticket cost, the price for a franchise in the new Call of Duty World League is an estimated $25 to $40 million a slot. So from their perspective, is it a win no matter what happens to the league?
You want to go first?
Well, I just listen. I'm not sure if I'll be answering your question properly, but both the Overwatch League and Call of Duty World League strike me as constructs that are kind of built to have the triggers to speak the language that traditional American sports investors would understand and find appealing. More so than anything else. It's kind of like you want money from your parents for something. You're going to figure out how to you say, hey, I need X, Y, and Z, and it's going to help me in school. And it's a book. You want me to read books, right? Right. That's kind of, okay, well, here's a fixed slot that you have. Here's a city-based thing. And you will own New York City in esports. And here's this. And they go, these are usually men of 50 plus, used to one way of doing business, and they treat, let's say, an esports league as a parallel to the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, or whichever major sport out there, rather than something of its own. And I believe that's going to change eventually as people see how these models pan out, because a closed model, especially in North America, that doesn't have an economy below that league, is going to be a failing model in the long term, because if you don't have entities paying for salaries for non-major league players, let's call it, then who's going to replace those people who don't want to play anymore or are no longer good enough to play? If you don't have your college system below, or your country league system below, or anything, you've just closed yourself in a room with limited oxygen. You're the only one breathing, but it's running out, and it's a ticking problem, where the number of players that are really, really excellent is going to go down, I believe.
Yeah, and interesting point as well. I think we even spoke about this years back, but when you watch physical sports, the viewing experience is increased because you're in a stadium, because you're watching it live. Specifically for football, both American and European, for hockey, like you see everything, whereas television, you get the one camera shot. You can make an argument that esports is actually better viewed at home on your computer than it is being in an arena. I know Ben and we've been at arenas where you're sitting in the seats and you're staring up at the screen, and by the end of the day your back hurts and you think to yourself, why didn't I just stay at home on the couch with friends? That's kind of off topic, so we're limited time.
No, I'll say this.
Huh.
The peak experience for esports at an arena, like the international, I am Cologne, I am Katowice, Worlds final. Nothing beats that. You can have the best couch in the world and the best friends and however many beverages in front of you and the comfort of your home. Nothing beats a peak esports experience. An average esports experience, like regular season match number 12 out of 50, random example, with team number 10 versus team number 8 in the league, I'm not going to leave home for that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a huge difference, a huge drop off. Like every time I watch a video of like the $1 million Echo Slam, I still get like chills down my spine because I was like under the stadium there. I was working at the event, and the entire stadium starts shaking as if there's an earthquake. And you get like, there's nothing else like that. You can't like buy that feeling. Even if you have like a 11.2 surround sound system, you get no concept of that. And almost like a lot of work has gone into trying to make the experience at home as if you're like all the perks of being at home, but also the perks of being in the stadium through VR, through multiple cameras and all that. But nothing comes close to me. Nothing at all. It's just something about that, the feeling.
Yeah, I would agree. We could continue on this, but we're really running low on time. I wanted to get into just sources of revenue. If we look towards standardization, if we want to have a more profitable and sustainable esports scene, then we're going to need to look at maximizing our sources of revenue and ensuring that they're spread amongst. So to Carmac's point, that kid 5 years from being a superstar will have a system that he can grow in and eventually become a professional. From your side on the TO, what I see as the main sources of revenue right now, when you are not the publisher, are your media rights, your live data sales, and your sponsorships. And then publishers, of course, have access to all of the digital revenue, which we will talk about later. So that's a lot. Ben, if you could chime in on live data and why it's so valuable to an esport. And then after Carmac, if you could touch on whether you think standardization is possible without accessing digital revenue from the publisher side. But Ben, you can go first.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, so in esports, there are the 3 big titles, Dota 2, League of Legends, and CSGO. And these represent, like, in viewership, huge amounts of consistent viewership. So other esports will come and go, but for the most part, these have been the main 3. On the data side, this means that when you start coming to, if you're a potential data customer, what I mean by that is if you're someone who's interested in accessing live data for these, whether you're a bookmaker, whether you're a media partner, whether you want to make a stats website that shows live data of people moving around the map, whatever your use case is, one of the most annoying things is having to like integrate with a specific title and then, there's another title you have to do a completely different integration. And these barriers to entry means that you stop getting the easy access to the entire like esports ecosystem. Every game is a silo in their own regard. So yeah, at the company I work for, Bayes Esports, our like primary job is trying to get you accurate and reliable data. And we work with multiple different tournament organizers, including the ESL, publishers, including Riot Games. Our job is to take their data and make sure that it's as easy as possible to share with our customers. And I think that this is something which, in general, is when I heard the topic was going to be standardization today, I thought this is a good topic to talk about, primarily because, in general, even though there are other players within our industry, other like competitors to us, in general, we can work towards coming up with a single coherent method of data sharing that gets around all of the intricacies, the annoyances, the nuances that exist within every single esports title. And just an example of this, I'm going to say, like, in Dota 2, what is a death? Like, how do you die in Dota 2, the video game? And the answer is there are like 20 different edge cases on how you can die, when it's not a death, when it is a death, when do you come back to life, all of this. And these nuances are just make it so complicated for someone who's getting into live data to understand. They want a single, consistent reference point to be able to understand and implement without needing to go into the details. So I think that in terms of like esports data, there's huge potential for standardization here, whether it's, you know, 1 or 2 different formats that come across, and this would make it easier for more and more people to get involved on the live data side and be able to get the value from data straight away.
So, Carmac, if you could elaborate on just why that's important from your side as a TO and why live data is so valuable, and then also if you want to discuss media rights or sponsorships, and then of course the digital revenue side.
Well, so a couple of things there. Obviously, anything that makes us money and helps us fund running great tournaments is seen as a benefit. So if we can do anything as an industry within Counter-Strike to provide to buyers our data the same way, that makes us more attractive, that's great, right? Can you guys hear that? The benefits of living in a brand new building. Sorry about that. Anyway, when it comes to revenue streams, we've got obviously sponsorships are by far the number one. We've got tickets as well for live events, but that is, you know, that's a nice bonus. It's not really paying the bills, so to say. And there's data. In-game economy for us doesn't really exist, and hopefully it will at some point. Minus when you hold a CSGO major, then you get a share of the in-game items that are sold. And finally, media rights. Media rights are the most interesting because obviously everyone in the industry is operating with the hope and idea that there will be increased competition for media rights in esports, because that's where the viewership is. That's where young people go and watch things. So if you compete for the eyeballs of young people around the world, you eventually are going to end up in esports. And that media rights revenue stream is only as large as the competition within it. Just to give an example, with an attempt that we've had in order to increase it, we sold our rights exclusively to Facebook at some point for multiple reasons, which I'd probably get in trouble if I were to discuss at length why it didn't work. But for multiple reasons, it didn't work. And there is essentially one great player that's contributed to esports, maybe in many ways more than any other company in the world. That is Twitch. That is currently the number one platform. If you're not on Twitch, you're not in esports, right? So the bigger the competition there, the better that revenue stream becomes for us. When it comes to standardization, I'm not really... I look at it from a point of view of narratives and making things accessible for the average fan to follow. It's difficult from somebody to jump from Blast to ESL in Counter-Strike and understand these two worlds, let alone jump from Dota to League of Legends to Overwatch to Counter-Strike. So from that perspective, standardization, in terms of standardization, we could go a little bit further within a specific game that is run by multiple TOs to figure out how we tell narratives that don't confuse the living expletive out of people.
Got it. We're really low on time. If you guys have any questions, do make sure you post them. We've got a couple that we'll get to in a second. I wanted your guys' opinion real quick. So obviously esports as in like this conglomerate being standardized, I think is just not a thing anymore, right? DreamHack used to have 10 championships in a bunch of different games, whereas now games like League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Dota, like they sell out their own arenas for their championships. But the big difference we have still is that there's no ownership, like say ESL has over the game itself. Do you think that there will be a future where you, as ESL or me, say as like a team owner or player, will have the ability to influence and like own my own destiny in my specific game, or are we always going to be beholden to the wishes of the publisher? And does the publisher have a responsibility to the game and the ecosystem they create? Looking at Counter-Strike, it's been a game for 20 years. Is there a scenario you're prepared for where the game stopped being updated, as an example?
I mean, I think I can answer straight away one of your points, which is there a responsibility from the publisher to the players? And I think absolutely there is, especially within Dota 2. In Dota 2, the way just very briefly, there are tournaments throughout the year and there are leagues throughout the year. The tournaments, except for three of them, mean nothing. They're just like third-party tournaments. There are 2 majors, and then there's like the international, and then there's these leagues. And Valve runs the leagues. Valve through they hire third-party tournament organizers to manage and run the leagues, and then they also hire third parties to run the majors, and they run the international along with the help of a single tournament organizer. So they are very much behind the scenes pulling all the strings. But for example, when there was because of how important the international is in terms of the prize money, represents like over 75% of the prize money in a year, Valve have such a direct control over every bit of the scene, but only when they want to. So when they say, for example, the international is going to be postponed by a year, what that basically means is the entire 75% of the cash inflow into the scene is delayed by a year. And that is like, multiple organizations have left the scene as a result. Multiple players have left. Like the overall money and funding into the scene has not been picked up by third parties because it doesn't make financial sense. So I think there's absolutely a responsibility for the players. And I think the fact that when it does come to like communication between Valve and other parties, whether that's tournament organizers, whether that's players, it's kind of disgusting that some of the tier 2 players, when I say tier 2, I mean not on any of the top 10 teams or top 12 teams in the world. They have there's no direct communication. There's no due process that they have if they have like a dispute, or if one of them gets banned or something like that. There's no way for them to manage their own future. So it's very frustrating, and I absolutely think that for many esports titles, we definitely need to see a change in how that is done if we want to be able to have a future in the esports that we care about.
And we only have 2 minutes, Carmac. So do you have any final words on what sort of changes that could be? What you're personally going to try to spearhead?
Well, I'll just answer one little bit. I don't think the publisher is responsible for anything until they make themselves responsible, and then the onus is on them to stay and be committed and keep doing it. So if they don't see esports as an important component, leave it to the communities to organize themselves and run it, and it will be completely fine. I promise you. I play in leagues in a very small game, a niche game where the community organizes itself and it's completely fine, and we're all good. The moment the publisher steps in, you can't really be half pregnant, right? Either you're committed and you take responsibility, or you don't at all. But you can't go half in and half-ass it.
Got it. Well, we had so much more, but unfortunately, guys, we're out of time. It's been a joy talking to you guys. This is if you ever attend an esport event, hang out after the day ends at the hotel bar, and you'll get more of this for hours on end. But this has been great. Thank you very much for your time, guys, Carmac and Ben. I've been Kyle, and that's all we've got. So apologies couldn't get to the questions, but I'm sure we'll be back again. Hope you guys enjoyed, and enjoy the rest of the show.